So I think that's all of us that are coming. I'll keep an eye on the door. Um, uh, Maybe slightly different. We'll do some review. I've got a couple of things, little moments to kind of talk about tonight, and then we'll have some time of discussion. I just want to be clear. This is the last of the Thursday night studies. So, uh, oh, I see. Yeah. Well, I'm going to mute everybody now. Let's see. So just so we're all clear, this is the last of the Thursday nights until further notice. We're working in the office on supplying every household with an electronic version of an Advent devotional. But we're still trying to nail that down. So there'll be things for you to do and things for you to explore during the season. And then we'll reconvene with another study, probably first week of February. So with that in mind, let's start with a word of prayer. God, we thank you for bringing us together, for the opportunity to study the words that you've left behind for us to do the things that we say are the reasons we study your word, which is to know something of your relationship with your human creation, to be encouraged, and also to get a glimpse into your mind and your heart, so that we can live that way here in our own lives. We ask for your blessing on this hour as we wrap up this study and as we move into the Thanksgiving and Advent seasons. We pray this in your Son's name. Amen. So I sort of folded part of my usual intro into the prayer, the reasons we read the Bible, for encouragement, to get see the record of God's interaction with his human creation, and to get a glimpse into God's heart. I think that last one is something that is worth, long after we're done with this particular class, that's worth continuing to wrestle with. That the Bible's not a rule book. It's not even a very good theology book. No one who was sitting down to write a theology book would write it the way our Bible is constructed. The Bible covers stories over centuries, but one of the things it does is it gives us into a little peek into God's mind and heart. I said this in a previous study, or maybe in a sermon once, that sometimes we forget God has a personality, and so that's important, because the opposite of that is, sort of the Star Wars version of the Almighty, which is the Force, right? And that's a force you can tap into and manipulate. God is not for being manipulated. God is a person. It's a person with a personality. It's got things that God has things that God likes. God has things that God does not like. And God has things that get under his skin and cause discipline for his people. So some of that, we're on the edges of some of that in Ecclesiastes, as we've been saying. The themes in Ecclesiastes have not changed since the last time we were together. A frustration with the lack of fairness in the world. I'm gonna do a little reflection on each of these as we go, since this is our last time. But for the last 15 or 20 years, I've been involved in working with Christian ministries in the West Bank, basically in what is supposed to be Palestine. And the people that I have known there have been gracious, peacemaking people. I think we forget that a significant minority of Palestinians are Christians. When I was there, the mayor of Bethlehem was a Palestinian Christian woman. For the last, 50, 60 years, but certainly over the last decade or two, there has been a protracted, consistent attempt to drive Palestinians out of their country by Israel. And now you can't blame Israel. Israel's doing that out of some of it's out of security reasons. Some of it is out of a misguided belief that just because on one page of the Bible it says that they get that land, that they forget all the other things about the covenant. I say that to say I'm fed up with the unfairness in the world too. And I'm fed up with the unfairness of people who don't have their own anything, don't have their own power, don't have their own water, don't have their own security forces. I mean, they do now in a small way on some of those things, but and they don't have their own homes. And it has been a global act of unfairness over the last 50 years, the way that group has been treated, both internally and also by the world. And my country paid for it. Every billion of it. And so I'm frustrated by that. So, it's my last time here. We can't complain next week. So I'm frustrated with the lack of fairness too. And we saw Kohelet a couple of weeks ago talk about how it's, with power comes the capacity to oppress, and that, oppressors, that's what they're like. They use their power against the weak. And I think we're seeing quite a bit of that these days. The second theme beyond that frustration is a disappointment with God. And I think that one's a deeper one. That one is a much more personal thing for people. I think many of us can have seasons where we feel disappointment with the way that life worked out. We thought we were going to have a long, healthy retirement. We didn't. We thought a business venture might work, and it didn't. We thought that our kids might do certain things, and they didn't. There's all kinds of things that people can be disappointed. And that disappointment oftentimes focuses on God if we're people of faith. Why didn't God give me the thing that I asked for? And those are questions that I think emerge in Ecclesiastes. For all of his wealth and wisdom, the speaker is disappointed. The speaker is disappointed with the way his life turned out. And then finally, there is this awareness of our mortality, that's the third theme. We're going to see some of that this evening. We've seen it already through the other weeks that we've been together. That the Kohelet says at one point, how unfair of God to give us an awareness of eternity, but not to make us eternal, at least not in our physical life. And remember that in the Old Testament, there's very little clear, agreed upon understanding of what the afterlife is like. And so you have to put yourself back in Kohelet's position, that he's disappointed. He's done all these things. He's learned all this stuff, only in time to hit his declining years and to leave this earth. And so an awareness of mortality is something that separates us from other living things. And it also, it clearly separates us from God. But it also, I think we see now with our vantage point post Jesus, that it gives us a different kind of connection with God. And so those are the themes that we have been looking at as we go through Ecclesiastes. All of that's been in the context of the wisdom literature. And I know I harp on this every time, but at the end of each of these classes, there's a handful of things we all know well. I want this to be one of them. That the wisdom literature in the Old Testament is there to teach us how to live in covenant relationship with God and with each other. How are we supposed to live? Okay, we got what we believe. We've got the God that we trust. How then should we live? There are books with that title. I'm trying to remember if that's even a Francis Schaeffer book from back in the day. How then shall we live? And that ought to be a perennial question for a person of faith. I believe these things. I trust that God is who God says he is. How then am I supposed to live the years that I have on this earth? Ecclesiastes turns that on its head, because most of the wisdom literature says, do this, 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 and this, and your life will be like this. And Kohelet knows that's not exactly true. I think we're supposed to live in a way that aspires to that kind of that life. But life isn't math, right? You don't take a house and a job and a couple of cars and a few kids and then put an equal sign to happy life. The math oftentimes in our lives is disappointing. And I think that's where Kohelet, for a while at least, for most of the book, is turning the wisdom literature on its head. I don't want to drill down too much on that he says everything's meaningless, life is meaningless, and that we don't gain anything from all the toil. When he says gain or profit, he's talking about an economy where lifespan is the currency. Where, gosh, my life should be 3 times as long as the average person because I've acquired so much wisdom. That's kind of the mindset of Kohelet. And you and I know that's foolishness, right? There have been Nobel Prize winners in one discipline or another who die in their 40s. It is just, there's no math that is firm that says if you do this, 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 and this, you'll live this many years. And so as we moved through Ecclesiastes, we were reminded of the covenant God made with his people. And the covenant was, I will bless you. I will give you blessings. You will follow me. You will worship me. And you will be a blessing to all the other nations. So in other words, love me and I'll bless you. And then you share the blessings with everyone else. That is love God and love people. It is something, if you come to First Press, that you hear Jen say just about every Sunday, which is by design. We are trying to instill in our children the greatest commandment: love God and love other people. And so, but if wisdom literature is about living a covenant life, then we've got to be reminded of the covenant. And that covenant is God expects to be worshiped faithfully. God will return that in blessings. And then our job is to share those blessings with other people. Remember, as we have read through some of the other prophets during our times together in midweek evenings, that there are 2 things that get under God's skin. Remember, God's got a personality. 2 things. You may all have things that really drive you crazy, right? Mine is people who don't use turn signals. Okay? It makes me glad that my car did not come equipped with heat-seeking missiles. So, but God has things that get under his skin. These are the things that consistently over centuries have made God angry. One of them is insincere and loveless worship. People who took the Old Testament law and decided, okay, I gotta kill this goat, and I gotta burn this bird, and I gotta pour this grain offering and a glass of wine over here, and then good, I've done my bit. God hates that. And I'm not making that up. In Amos, he says, I hate your religious feasts. God says that. So God cares about that, and he cares about when his people deny justice to the weak. And so these are the 2 things in God's personality. When we get that glimpse into the mind and heart of God, those are 2 things that God cares about more than other things. And so when we're trying to say, gosh, what should I do? How then shall I live? Well, I want to worship God sincerely, and I want to be an agent for justice for people who don't have anyone else to look out for them. Remember that last week, when Kohelet talked about worship, he said, better not to say anything than something you don't truly believe. Right? Better better not to say anything than something you're not going to make good on. And so we hear these in two different ways when Kohelet talks. He says in chapter 5, do not be quick with your mouth, do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God, if it's not true. And so then Kohelet turns to the second part of covenant life, how we treat other people. He says in verse 8 of chapter 5, if you see the poor oppressed in a district and justice and rights denied, don't be surprised. And he goes on to say, because one leader is taking orders from another leader who's taking orders from the king. Power is what creates this system of oppression. But we know from the covenant that one of the things that gets under God's skin is the denial of justice to the average person. So I'm going to skip ahead just a bit here. But he ends that chapter by saying, this is what I observed. This is what I have observed to be good, that it's appropriate for a person to eat and to drink and to find satisfaction from their labor during the few days of life that God has given them. And he said, moreover, when God gives someone wealth and possessions and the ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot and be happy, this is a gift from God. And so I take that as advice from Kohelet. This is part of the wisdom literature. Don't get too obsessed. Don't try and understand. No, that's not exactly right, because I like the quest for knowledge. Don't seek to figure out how everything happens and why everything happens at the expense of living your life. That seems to me to be good, practical advice. Not to pun here, but that's wisdom, right? That's wise advice right there in the heart of a piece of wisdom literature that turns wisdom literature on its head. The implication is that enjoyment itself is a gift from God, that it's a blessing. And what are God's people meant to do with blessings? Share them with other people, literally with all the nations on earth. Kohelet turns a corner there a little bit. And so I think that's, he's starting to make sense out of a world that doesn't always make sense. And he's saying, look, in the midst of that, enjoy what you have, share with those who don't have enough, and get on with the good part of living. And then he reminds us that the wisdom literature teaches us about living those covenant lives in community. And so being a part of a community, I think, is an important part. I've been a pastor for more than 30 years, and I can't tell you how many times I've run into somebody who finds out what I do and say, I don't really go to church. But I have my own kind of spirituality at home. And I'm saying, well, good. Part of me wants to say, well, it's better than nothing, but not by much. This faith is meant to be lived in community. The Bible's meant to be read out loud in community. Our service is meant to be done side by side in community. Our worship is meant to be done in community. Our learning, just like this, is meant to be done in community. And so so much of both the Old and New Testaments are filled with instructions to the community. in First or Second Peter, I can't remember which one. The line is, now that you've come to Christ, you are a royal people, a chosen nation, or maybe it's a chosen people and a royal nation. I can't remember. But what it is not you're just one guy sitting by your fireplace, being church by yourself, because that ain't the way it works. Iron can't sharpen iron if there's just iron there, right? So he reminds us that and I loved that reminder. Two are better than one, right? A three-stranded rope can't be broken apart. And so whatever else you do, and however else you are working out your own faith and journey of faith, at least do part of it in community. It is how it was designed. It's in the owner's manual. It is literally how you set this up. So then we come to some of the smattering that I want to talk about before we open up for discussion. I want to look at part of chapter 8, because Kohelet apparently got himself too happy in chapter 6. He goes back in chapter 8 to talking about the ways that life is unfair. And in verse 14, he starts by saying, there is something else meaningless that occurs on earth. The righteous who get what the wicked deserve, and the wicked who get what the righteous deserve. This too, I say, is meaningless. I think that's one of those very almost modern sounding statements in Ecclesiastes. He's recognizing, even though wisdom literature teaches us to follow the covenant and to live in covenant relationship with God and with each other, and to follow the law, and that because of that we'll be blessed, he's recognizing something here that we all know to be true. Sometimes the righteous get what the wicked deserve, and good people get wicked people get what righteous deserve. We get that life isn't fair, and what he's saying in the midst of this is live your life anyway. Sometimes what I have to do to convince myself not to obsess about something that is just drastically unfair about the world is I have to admit sometimes that's above my pay grade. That sometimes I've got to leave some of those huge things to God. And that's not easy, because I'm wired to think I can figure everything out. Maybe it's one of the reasons I got a soft spot for Kohelet. But I'm wired to think if I just put my shoulder into this, I can get it figured out. I can fix it. And what Ecclesiastes reminds us is that there's no amount of shoulder that's going to fix some of this stuff. Some of this you have to keep your eyes on, but also sidestep as you live your own life. You got a limited number of years. Fix what you can, step over the rest. It is a little bit like the Serenity Prayer, which oddly enough was written by a pastor, one of two brothers who were great theologians back in the teens and 20s. It's Reinhold Niebuhr, right, that wrote the Serenity Prayer. May God help me to fix the thing. I'm going to summarize it because I know what it means. May God help me to fix the things I can fix, to avoid the things I can't, and have the wisdom to know the difference. May God grant me the serenity. That's the thing. That's why it's the Serenity Prayer. But there is the wisdom of Ecclesiastes is built into that prayer. Serenity comes from tackling the problems we can tackle, and maybe, trying some of the harder ones too, but also recognizing that there's some things we can't fix and generating the wisdom to know the difference. The more I think about it, the more I think the serenity prayer may be Niebuhr's distillation of the book of Ecclesiastes. If it's not, it certainly works that way. And so I like that in chapter 8, he notices that the world's not fair. And we're right to notice it. We're right to try and do something about it. We're also right to live our lives and enjoy our lives while we try. And then finally, he gets to verse 15 in chapter 8. So I commend the enjoyment of life, because there is nothing better for a person under the sun than to eat and drink and be glad. Then joy will accompany them in all their toil, in all the days of life that God has given them under the sun. That is a relatively sunny passage from Kohelet. Am I right? That doesn't sound like the guy that wrote the first 3 chapters. Very honestly, it doesn't sound like the guy that wrote the rest of this chapter, but it's that's just what you get from Kohelet. But it says, so I commend you, enjoy your life, because there's nothing better than to eat and drink and be joyful with all the things that you've been given within the limited time you've been given. And then he touches on a couple of the same themes in chapter 9. He says, and I think this is again recognizing the unfairness of the world out there. He says, the race, this is verse 11 in chapter 9, the race is not to the swift or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise or wealth to the brilliant or favor to the learned. But time and chance happen to them all. And so no one knows when their hour will come. So let me translate that, because, poetic language doesn't always translate through Zoom. So the fastest person doesn't always win. The strongest person doesn't always defeat the weaker army. People who are wise don't always have enough to eat for themselves. And smart people don't always accumulate wealth. And favor, which is the sense that, somebody's life goes very well, it doesn't happen all the time for smart people. And then you get these nuggets of wisdom. But time and chance happen to them all. In other words, their lifespan doesn't change. Lifespan is lifespan. Now, it's not the same for everybody, but you don't get an extra measure of it by being wise. And chance, accident. One of the smartest kids I'd ever heard of from Burbank High, the high school I went to, the year after I graduated, was killed in a freak accident in Burbank, in a car accident that took his life at 17. Who knows what that kid was going to accomplish? Carl Bailey was his name. But time and chance happen to all of us, right? Lifespan and accident are really the things in Kohelet's eyes that rule the world. And then just to make sure we understand the point, no one knows when their hour will come. So the next lines are so depressing, I'm just not even going to read them right now. Halfway through chapter 12, the voice switches back from Kohelet to the narrator. I got neighbors on the brain. From Kohelet to the narrator. And so the narrator steps back in, as he did at the beginning of the book, and leaves us with this wisdom. God will be the one who judges everything, who decides everything. And so hear this last bit of wisdom. Starting in verse 13. Now everything's been heard, and here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all humankind. It took us 11 and a half chapters to get to the nugget of wisdom that takes us from looking back and looking inward to looking forward. Right? We've been looking back, we've been looking inward, now we're looking forward. And the advice for us to look forward ends up being exactly what wisdom literature teaches us to do in the first place. Fear God, keep God's commandments. This is the duty of all humankind. This is what we were meant and made to do. Fear God and keep his commandments. Now, I want to unpack that a little bit, because the cynical way to interpret that is, we just got to follow the rules. But you have to be wiser than that when you read this. Each one of us has to be wiser than that and see it through two things: the original covenant God made with Abraham, and the two things get under God's skin. So it's not just go out and follow the rules. It's fear God and keep the commandments, including the commandments to be a blessing to the rest of the world. And that's the duty of all humankind. I love that that's the way that section wraps up there. Fear God, keep God's commandments. This is the duty of all humankind. In the end, think of the things that not the things that Kohelet has complained about, but think of the things that we've heard from Kohelet that are advice for living. Eat good food, drink good drink, work at being glad and enjoying what you have, fear God, in other words, worship God, and keep God's commandments. God's commandments include love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Right out of Leviticus. That's what Jesus is quoting, by the way, in Matthew when he says that. Two different verses from two different parts of Leviticus. And so at the end, this is the sum total. You did not see this coming when we first started this journey together. Eat and drink and enjoy your life, worship God, and keep his commandments. It ends up being a message like many other sections of the Bible. We just took a different route to get here. And so, with that in mind, I just want to say again, like I said a couple of weeks ago, I think we should let ourselves up a little bit and see Ecclesiastes in light of the gospel. Because if the themes in Ecclesiastes are frustration with the lack of fairness in the world, disappointment with God, and awareness of our mortality, listen to how the ministry of Jesus turns all of those on their head. Christ offers personal restoration, right? Christ offers communal reconciliation. And in the end, Christ offers a sense of calling to service and to healing and to reconciliation in the world. So the things that are under the skin of Kohelet are things that are renewed and restored and rebirthed because of Jesus. And so this whole time, that's the paragraph I've been trying to get to in the last 8 weeks that we've been together now. But I think Ecclesiastes, as hard a read as it was in the beginning, gets us to this place in a more meaningful way because it's acknowledged all of our worst fears and impulses. This is not a rosy book. And yet at the end, you get to eat good food, drink good drink, be glad in your life with what you have, be content, and worship God and live according to God's commandments. Not bad advice, right? We get here to a 5-line sermon that's the most important sermon any of us can hear. Enjoy the life God gives you with the time God gives you, worship God, and follow God's commandments to be a blessing to the nations. Okay, so I'm going to unmute us and give us a little bit of extra time to talk, partly because I'm done talking. Although only until somebody asks me a really good question. So what do you think about Ecclesiastes? What do you think differently now? Lois, please.
Thanks, John.
Lois?
I just was wondering, how do you extrapolate this to other religions in humankind that believe in a God that has different commandments?
Well, I think part of the life of faith is choosing one way, sometimes at the exclusion of another. So,
Right.
So I think these are, the Abrahamic faiths at some point, at some place, they all would buy into this. Maybe not the Jesus part at the end, but certainly the conclusions of Kohelet would be conclusions that a faithful, observant Jew would have, and a faithful Muslim would have. For all that, and honest to God, this is so hard to say with the way the last 6 weeks have gone since the terrorist attack in Israel. But because there's just nothing, you cannot excuse that kind of butchery, even if you can explain it in context. But that is not the definition of Islam any more than the Ku Klux Klan is an accurate depiction of American Christianity. And so, listen, I gave ourselves extra time just in case one of these things popped into my head. When I was in London, one of the members of my church, young dad, I'm going to mute. I'm just going to take a chance and see if that helps. One of the young dads in my church was late at night, and maybe I've told this story before, but a guy mugged him, and he held on to his wallet, and he tried to like wrestle the guy down, and the guy knocked him down and beat him up. And this is like 1 a.m. on in a residential part of London. And a young man came up to him and got his cell phone out and called an ambulance, and the ambulance came, and they were going to take him away. And the young man got in with this guy that he didn't know, got in with my friend. Then he went to the ER with him, sat in the ER for 3 hours. And it wasn't until my friend had been checked by a doctor and was told, look, you've been beat up, but you're going to be okay, that the guy went home. And my friend said, so why didn't you go? You didn't have to stay for me. We don't even know each other. And he said, in Islam, if you come across somebody who has been wounded, you stay with them until they're safe. Now, I guarantee you none of you have seen that in a headline that starts with Muslim did this. And yet those kinds of acts of faithfulness and those acts of discipline, spiritual discipline, happen all the time with Muslims in all kinds of countries. So I don't know about, there are certain things about our understanding of this Christian God that are in conflict with some of the ways other people think of a divine being. But this is the one that chose us, and this is the one that we choose. And so it's our job to figure out this God and this God's personality, and to conform ourselves to this God rather than the other way around, conforming God to us. So that's a ramble of an answer with a story in the middle, Lois, but there you go.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, John. This study really helped me, since I've read the Bible from cover to cover at least 35 times, including this book, and I was always frustrated. And you've explained a lot. I appreciate it. I'm glad that we have similar frustration with the drivers on the freeway that don't signal. It's terrible, but I appreciate what you said about 2 weeks ago, that it's more than just faith, it's a matter of trusting God.
Mm.
And I think that's a level of faith that it carries us through the Christian faith. And
Yeah.
of course, we'll have eternal life.
Yeah.
And I've made it to 90, so I've
Good
been.
for you, man.
What did he say?
Yeah, thanks for that, Roger. I think that it's important for us to continue to move through the words of the Bible, and we learn different things from them each time we see them. And the example I always give of that is, you guys know the movie The Caine Mutiny?
Mhm. Mhm.
One of my top 10 favorite movies. I'm not sure it's the best movie out there, but it has this great cast, right? Humphrey Bogart, of course, and Fred McMurray and Van Johnson, and a handful of folks in there. Just great. Jose Ferrer, who broke his arm and is in the cast in the movie because he broke his arm right before they started shooting, and they didn't want to replace him. But it's a story about leadership and leadership under pressure, and how leadership can crack under pressure. And when I saw it as a kid, I thought, oh man, that Humphrey Bogart character, Captain Queeg, is nuts. And when I was more early adulthood and mid adulthood, I really appreciated the people who like stood up, right? Who mutinied, basically, the ones who mutinied. I really sided with them. I gotta say, at 60, I'm really sympathetic to Queeg. I read that movie completely differently now that I've been in my own ministry time, put into leadership roles in different contexts. You know what? It's hard. At 20, I didn't get how hard Queeg's job was. So I saw that movie differently at different times in my life. I read so many of the scriptures differently now than I did in my 20s. And I think I read it more graciously. I think I see the fuzzy edges and the latitude more than the hard-edged point of a lot of the scriptures that I read. I see them in more context. When somebody talks about aches and pains, I get it now in a way that I didn't get it at 20. I get Coelette's obsession with his own mortality now in a way that I didn't get 2 months ago. And so I think it's worth always reading these things again and trying to learn new things from them, because the scriptures might stay the same, but you're different every time you read them. I think that part's really important. So thanks for triggering that, Roger. That helps. Anna.
Oh, thanks so much for this series. I've learned a lot, and I'm so pleased that there's some cheerful stuff last time and this time that we can hang on to. And I really liked how you tied it into, don't just look at this one thing, tie it in with the gospel of Jesus. And there's a lot of hope there. And what you said about things changing as you get older. Recently, I've been rediscovering some Bach and some Chopin pieces. And I'm like, wait a minute, now, I mean, I turned 60 this year, and I'm like, wait a minute, I have a deeper way to interpret these puppies now that I'm 60 instead of 16.
Yeah.
It's kind of trippy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this must be what they say about the benefits of being around on this planet for a while. And there's also something that sticks with me. It's an experience I had at Opening Doors a few years ago. We were meeting in Wilson Hall.
Mm-hmm.
I met a lady of the Muslim faith. I forget which community she's part of, but I had no idea that Mary, the mother of Jesus, featured in the Quran. And that taught me that, wait a minute, there are cool connections we can keep looking for.
Mm-hmm.
There are, I mean, it's kind of like, I mean, it's there. Everything isn't just about me or just about America. There are connections between different things in this world that have nothing to do with us at all. And it's really, I love the idea of looking for more connections and more peace.
Yeah, a little bit at a time. I spent a few years on the board of an organization called Musalaha, that means reconciliation in Arabic. And the leader decided, it had a simple beginning. He started a summer camp for Israeli and Palestinian teenagers. And he took 10 of each out into the desert on camels. But one of each had to ride a camel together. So there'd be an Israeli kid and a Palestinian kid on a camel together, and then they'd camp out in the desert like Bedouins for a week. And he said, you know, I can't change what Israel and what Hamas and what Hezbollah and what Palestinian Authority and what America, I can't change what any of them are going to do. But I know those two kids on the back of that camel, they're not going to shoot each other 10 years from now. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, it's always cheesy. And there's a joke among pastors that you'd never trust a pastor that told the starfish story, right? You know, you're walking on the beach and there's thousands of starfish and you throw one in, and the one guy says to the other, you can't save them all. I said, I know, but I can save that one. The reason it's a cheesy story is because it's true. And it has some merit to it, even though you're never going to hear me use it in the pulpit.
John, I just want to add one quick thing that Anna said. There's a book out now called How to Know a Person.
Oh, yeah, David Brooks.
It's by David Brooks. It's astounding. And I would recommend it to everybody just to pick it up and wander through it, because it talks a lot about, given all the divisiveness that we face everywhere these days, how to work your way through that and find out that we really do have a lot in common with everybody. An incredible read, How to Know a Person.
Yeah, thank you. I just wrote that down. I love David Brooks's books. And
his newest book came out about a month ago, and I've got a list now of 20 names on it. I'm going to start giving it to people.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, that's you know, there's a thing that goes around that shows like 6 skeletons, and it's a you know, it's a Christian skeleton and a Jewish skeleton and a Muslim skeleton and a gay person's skeleton, and you know, all these things, they all look the same. The skeletons are all the same. So I think there's some of that. That's what I mean about, you know, I think when we get older, we're supposed to get a little bit more latitude in the way that we read the scriptures. I think we're supposed to have the wisdom as we get older to say, it's not a rule book. To call the Bible a rule book is to diminish so much of the depth of what it offers us.
Oh, yeah.
Like I said, it's a record, a written record of God's interaction with his human creation. That's so much more than a rule book. And, you know, I think we all have to, as Paul says, with fear and trembling, decide which things are for the time that they were written and which things are for all time. And I don't pretend to have the right answer on all those. But I make those judgments. If you've watched The West Wing, you know that scene where he is confronted by somebody who says homosexuality is an abomination, and he says, Leviticus 18:22, chapter and verse. But then he starts asking this same person a series of questions. My chief of staff works on the Sabbath. Do I have to kill him myself, or can I have somebody else do it? My daughter, what's a fair price for her to be sold into slavery? She's a sophomore at Georgetown. I just watched this today, so it's all fresh in my mind. But he lists all these things because all of these things are part of the same book where Leviticus 18:22 resides. He says his brother, do I have to stone him, or can we wait till the harvest because he grows two different crops side by side? All of these rules punishable by death in the Old Testament. And so we have to choose which ones of those are for all time and which ones of those are of their time, without missing the big picture of the Bible, the big message, which is love God, be blessed by God, and share that blessing with someone else. Remember, after all of that time, after the 1,000 years covered in the Old Testament, when Jesus gets a chance to say, this is the most important thing, that's what he says. Love God and love other people. He doesn't say any of the other stuff. He doesn't say, memorize the Torah. He doesn't say, the seventh commandment. That's the most important thing. And don't quiz me. I don't know what the seventh commandment is. But he says, love God and love people. And so if he can say it, so can we. Anna, please.
I wanted to be sure and say, I really like how you've deliberately put, love people and do things, etc., Jen's statement, because that's really stuck in my brain and my heart. So I really appreciate that.
Good.
I mean, it'll come into my head partway through the week. I'll think of 1/3 of it and I'll remember the other thirds, even though I can't remember them right now because I'm talking. And
Okay.
and it's hard when you're on stage to remember everything. Like, what was the other thing? Oh yeah, the mission statement at the end.
Yeah.
I confess that almost every Sunday I keep hearing, if you choose to accept it, in there. But the serious part of that is,
yeah.
I really like the mission statement, and I'm glad we make a habit of it every week. So.
Yeah. Some people will say, when you say something over and over again, it loses its meaning. I don't think so. I think when you say, now it can, if you're not really paying attention, but when I taught my son the creeds when he was in grade school, we said them on the way to school. Now, because it was a conversation between father and son, we had all kinds of conversations about those. But in the end, we were just reciting. That kid memorized the Nicene Creed in 11 days, in 11 tries. Memorized it. So for those of you who say, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're doing the Nicene Creed, it's actually like 8 lines longer than the Apostles' Creed. My son, when he was 11, memorized it on the way to school. But I think when we say those things, we do a couple things. One, they're internalized because we've memorized them, right? So those words become part of our internal language. But they also become a hedge against learning something or straying into something that is sort of outside those boundaries. But the main thing is we have continuity with people who've said those words over centuries. So when I say the Nicene Creed, and I love the Nicene Creed, when we say it together, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, people have been saying a version of this creed for 1,700 years. People like me just trying to stumble along, follow Jesus in their lives, they've been saying this creed for 1,700 years. I like that part. I think that makes it worth saying.
I do want to mention, though, that because of my age, I remember the Holocaust. My wife's older brother was in the army and helped liberate one of the concentration camps.
Yeah.
And so the horrors of it had great impact on us. And it gives me a little more understanding of what the Jews feel when it comes to never again.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah. I think we're coming up on 8 o'clock. Anybody have a final parting shot?
We're praying for you, John.
Thank you
Yes,
very
sir.
much. That means a lot to me. Thank you very much. Yeah.
And
I
I think of,
thank
I
you
think
for
of
this
you and
study.
Shelley every day. We think of you every day.
thank you very much. I know that means a lot to both of us. It's I've been getting good counsel from an older pastor that I trust about what it means to be the pastor as patient,
Mm.
because I know a lot about the other side, right? I've been in more hospitals than I can count. But it's very strange to be the patient and to be in this role. So I'm learning, we're going to learn a few new things together, all of us, over the next month and a half. And I have great preachers lined up for all of December and into January, including my wife.
Oh, good.
Oh,
Great.
You don't want to miss January 14th. She's
Great.
preaching that date.
Okay.
And but you're going to hear some really good people. You hear Jen, Joel, Tom Cochran. You're going to hear an amazing professor from Fuller, who's a dear friend of mine. She will be up to preach on Advent 3, which is December 17th. And so you guys are going to be in really good hands. So
Thank you for taking care of the flock.
of course,
Yeah, I was going to say we're used to being in good hands.
yeah. Well, we want you to. I want you to be challenged. These people will bring different voices into our space and get us through Advent and Christmas, and I'll do my best to be back standing on my feet by the middle of January or so.
And John, you are in good hands as well.
Thank you very much. Yes, I am.
Can you continue to give us updates as things go on so that
We will
know where your progress is and that
Yeah.
kind of thing? Because we are praying for you and
Thank
hoping
you.
for the best.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think one of the things that Gareth Eisnogel, who is the pastor that did our wedding at First Press back in September, he and I have known each other for about 20 years. He's recommending that I record a message from time to time that we can play during the service, and just as a way of greeting you and calling you to worship, and so that might happen, or some version of that might happen. And part of the report on my health will be what I look like in each of those videos. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, thank you very much. We welcome your prayers and love your care and concern, and we'll keep you posted.
But does God have skin to get under? He doesn't need a dermatologist like
The
I do.
metaphor, yeah. Let me close us in prayer together. God, we thank you that even in the Bible, we get a chance to ask you hard questions, that we get to, with our finite understanding, complain about the way the world works. But that the real call on our lives is to trust you, to worship you, to do the things that you've asked us to do, to live in such a way that you've modeled for us to live through your Son. And so we ask, as we end this class, but move into these amazing, beautiful seasons of Thanksgiving and Advent and Christmas, that you'd be with us, that you'd continue to shape us into the people that you want us to be. We pray all of these things in your Son's name. Amen.
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 Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bless.
Thank you,
Good
John.
luck.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
See you Sunday, some of you.
Sunday.